morning, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day Thursday. FDI inflows bounce back in February as the economy further reopens, and economist says investors will closely watch the plans of the next administration.
Presumptive President Bongbong Marcos is now in the process of forming a transition team. Marcos Jr. says he will tap his running mate, presumptive Vice President Sara Duterte, as the next Education Secretary.
Fitch Solutions expects the transition from President Duterte to the administration of Marcos Jr. to be smooth.
And on the corporate front, Araneta Properties nears 3-year highs on the local bourse on hopes that the company is headed for a better fortune under a Marcos Jr. presidency. We begin our broadcast with foreign direct investment surging by more than 46% in the month of February.
Now that's on the back of improved investor confidence following the further reopening of the domestic economy. Fresh data from the Bangko Sentral show that FDI net inflows climbed to nearly $900 million in February. That's from $611 million in the same month in 2021. The February 2022 figure is the highest since the $10.5 billion inflow recorded in December last year. Economists warn that a potential spike in COVID-19 infections here and abroad, as well as the prolonged Russia-Ukraine war, may hurt FDI inflows in the coming months. ING Bank Manila senior economist Nikki Mapa also said investors will also be closely watching the incoming administration's plans as the economy continues to recover from the pandemic. Former Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is poised for a landslide victory after securing more than 31 million votes in the presidential race. Fitch Solutions said Marcos's victory bodes well for policy continuity, noting that his economic and foreign policy stances are similar to those implemented by President Duterte. With this, the firm raises the short-term political risk index score for the Philippines to 66.5 from 64 as they anticipate a smooth transition to the incoming administration. Fitch Solutions also expects Marcos Jr. to focus on infrastructure development to drive economic recovery. However, the think tank InfraWatch PH pointed out that Marcos has yet to identify potential funding sources for his infrastructure plan. They say it is also not clear if Marcos will continue the Duterte administration shift from public-private partnerships to ODA funding for major projects. Meanwhile, in terms of foreign policy, Fitch Solutions believes Marcos will strive to maintain a delicate balancing act between the U.S. and China.
Now, speaking of transition, Bongbong Marcos says he's now forming a team to oversee the change in the administration.
This as the presumptive president claims a victory in the 2022 elections. Marlene Alcaide with the details.
While no official proclamation has been announced yet, spokesperson Attorney Vic Rodriguez has declared that Marcos Jr. is the 17th president of the Philippines. In a statement, Rodriguez noted that the former senator is ahead by 16 million votes over rival Vice President Leni Robredo. His camp is now in the next phase, forming a transition team.
He called for a meeting late this afternoon para makapagsimula na rin siguro nung proseso nung pagbubuo ng kanyang transition team.
He also said that some personalities have expressed interest to join Marcos Jr.'s cabinet. Among those is Agriculture Secretary William Dar.
I am offering my services to the country and to the new leader.
But sure to take a seat in the cabinet is Marcos Jr.'s running mate, presumptive Vice President Sara Duterte. Marcos Jr. has confirmed that Duterte Carpio will sit as Education Secretary. For News 5, Marlene Alcaide, we are One News.
And a huge task lies ahead for that cabinet team that the Marcos camp seems to be working on as early as now. But how confident is our guest today that Marcos has the capacity to lead the country into recovery? Let's find out from Filomeno Santa Ana III, a columnist from Businessworld and the coordinator of the Action for Economic Reforms. Sir Filomeno, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
All right.
Good morning to everyone.
Okay, we talked to you before the elections. In fact, you also wrote in your column before election day, you posed the question, who among the candidates is most competent to actually bring us some form of recovery after being heavily battered by the pandemic? There you said Robredo has the clear advantage and a Marcos Jr. win spells trouble for the economy. And here we are now, Marcos poised to win by a landslide victory. Your thoughts, sir, your action, and where does that bring us when it comes to economic recovery?
As I wrote in that column, the problem with the Marcos campaign was that it did not present a clear, coherent program, including a program for economic recovery. Now that he has won, we just have to wait and see what his economic policies in particular will be. Well, I don't want to confine the issues only to economics. It has to be, we have to look at the whole of our society. But we still do not have a clear picture of his program, his priorities. His statements are all rhetorical, so we have to wait and see. But precisely because we do not have clarity, there remains a lot of uncertainty.
Sir, hindi ba the assumption is status quo? The fact that he hasn't actually, as you rightfully mentioned, really laid down specific detailed, policies
yeah.
or platforms, is that not taken to mean, as other analysts have said, it's just a vote for continuing President Duterte's
like what we reported
policies?
earlier, have Fitch Solutions saying, in fact, that it's more or less going to be policy continuity under
Does
a
he
Marcos
actually
Jr.
need
presidency.
to unveil anything else? I mean,
Or to make any shift?
apart from we will continue as status quo?
In some areas, Marcos Jr. did explain some of his policies. Particularly, he made a promise to bring down the price of rice. He promised to reduce the price of rice to 20 pesos. Shell Habito exposed the problem of that kind of thinking. It's nice to the ear of our farmers and to the consumers, but if we analyze what's behind that, it would have a lot of costs for society. That would mean the Philippine government heavily subsidizing rice. That would mean reversing the rice tariffication law. So that is not a policy continuity at all. It's going to be a reversal of the rice tariffication law.
Sir, I guess a better question would be, should he continue the policies put in place already by President Duterte just to avoid more uncertainty during a recovery stage because of this pandemic? Should it just really be continued, or there needs to be something that he needs to change? And if so, what?
Definitely, we need great changes too. Even as we consolidate the reforms that we have chalked up through the years, changes in governance, changes in government spending, addressing equity, addressing health. So definitely reforms have to be pursued. Unfortunately, we do not have clarity with respect to the Marcos program. If he does speak about these issues, he speaks in populist terms. But that is precisely the problem. That will result in fiscal irresponsibility, which will aggravate our economic situation. At least during the Duterte administration, surely it was very populist. In a lot of areas, the spending was inefficient, but you had a technocracy that muted the populism.
Okay.
Definitely, Secretary Dominguez and the technocrats did a good job in putting in place the structural reforms.
I guess that also brings us to our next question, Sir Filomeno. I mean, we did talk to some experts who have said that what's going to matter now is that Marcos Jr. appoints efficient members of his cabinet team. Would it be wise at this stage for him to at least retain some of the economic managers of the Duterte administration just to make sure that there's going to be a smooth continuity here? And how huge of a challenge lies ahead for Marcos
Sir,
Jr.'s
sino
economic
kaya
team?
i-retain?
If possible.
Well, that's a big assumption. For one thing, would Marcos Jr. appoint these people? For another thing, would these technocrats accept being with Marcos? So it's very iffy. And in the end, it's all about the president. Even if you have a good cabinet, but if the president says something, the cabinet, being an alter ego of the president, has to follow the president. And we do know the record of Marcos Jr. His main goal really is to rehabilitate the Marcos rule, his father's rule. And that rule was associated with arbitrariness, cronyism, corruption, waste, legacy.
Okay. At least based from what our reporter sent us, you already have Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez coordinating with Marcos's team for a smooth transition. At the same time, you have Agriculture Secretary William Dar expressing interest, volunteering. But this time, there's one sure appointment already. You have presumptive Vice President Sara Duterte. According to Marcos Jr., she will be appointed as Education Secretary at a time when we have to address a huge learning poverty. Your thoughts on Duterte's appointment?
Does she have a track record on that, sir, for you?
I cannot say.
But-
Sorry, I don't have enough information to say to comment about education.
Okay, sir. What about...
But what we know is this. In relation to Marcos, not to Sara Duterte, Marcos wants to revise history. He wants to rehabilitate the image of his father. And
Sir,
education will be an instrument to do that revisionism.
Sir, do you still feel that after he did call on international media or international community to look not at his father's sins? That's what he is. So I don't know whether he said the word sins.
Not to look at his ancestors specifically, but just look at his actions
look at his
now
actions. Is that
as
not
incoming
already
president.
an admission of the fact that he recognizes that his ancestors might have had a bad reputation for specific reasons, sir? And is this not for maybe laying the groundwork for supposed change in the way he will govern compared to his father?
Well, at the same time, he's saying that he supports the policies of the Marcos rule.
Okay, but that also is quite difficult.
Some of his pronouncements echo what Ferdinand Marcos Sr. did during his long rule. For example, on rice policy, on fuel, and others.
Okay. Sir, what about the foreign relations po with the U.S. and China? The U.S. actually congratulated Marcos Jr. on this win. Was that surprising for you given the fractured ties with that family specifically?
It is not surprising because the U.S. is also wise. It plays the long game and it needs the Philippines regardless of who is in power.
But how do you think our foreign policy is going to shape up under a Marcos presidency? I mean, you have certain limitations, your legal limitations for Marcos to even visit the U.S. So how are things going to shape up from that point of view?
again, wait and see. Let's see
Alright.
who the Foreign Affairs Secretary will be.
Okay, so I think wait and see. Too early to tell, no? We are also waiting for the
I think
next
that has been
pronouncements.
really the theme now. Wait
Yeah.
and see.
A lot still hanging in the balance.
Thank you
Maraming
very much
salamat po.
again, Sir Filomeno Santa Ana III, a Businessworld columnist and Action for Economic Reforms co-founder and coordinator rather. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
As mentioned earlier on, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has congratulated presumptive President Bongbong Marcos for his victory in the 2022 polls. In a statement, Blinken said the United States is looking forward to working with Marcos Jr. to strengthen the alliance between Washington and Manila. Blinken says the two countries are, quote, friends, partners, and allies, quote, unquote. Thus, the U.S. will continue to collaborate closely with the Philippines to promote respect for human rights and to advance a free, open, connected, secure, and resilient Indo-Pacific region.
Now, pausing for a quick break. Right after that, we'll take a look at the local bourse's performance this morning ahead of the release of first quarter GDP figures.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
And you're still watching Business World live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
All right, Dan, presumptive President Bongbong Marcos looking to build his cabinet. Are his statements enough to quell the three-day bloodshed on the bourse?
Well, Jess, if you can see my terminal here, you can see that we did hit a 9-month low yesterday. We were the second worst in Asia already, and that bloodshed does not seem to be quelled just yet. So still a lot of uncertainties. We're down by 0.6%. Now, AP Securities did mention yesterday that all of this is because investors are generally cautious. They are staying on the sidelines. In fact, the foreign outflow already this month has ballooned to $100 million we've lost from foreign investors. But they did say that this is irrational. It is not driven by fundamentals. Now, add to that, Philippines was also dropped to the bottom of JP Morgan Southeast Asia investment list. That advises investors to sell into the possible post-election hope rally. But of course, a lot of things going on, Jess. There will be the Q1 GDP, and that will determine how our recovery has really been fundamentally. So we'll be watching out for that at 10 a.m. Now, some businesses, however, are already getting on with it and bucking that downtrend, Jess. I'm just going to pull out a couple of stocks for you if I can find that in my terminal here. Give me just a second. Okay, one is of course Bloomberry. This is Enrique Razon. He plans to now invest in the casino venture of Dennis Uy. We all know that Dennis Uy is a longtime supporter of President Rodrigo Duterte, and the shares of PH Resorts, which I'll be pulling out for here, just to show that Bloomberry is down this morning but has been up by 3.2% in the past 3 days. But take a look at PH Resorts this morning. That's already jumped by 6% at the open, and in the last 3 days, close to 4% on the back of that news. Now, another, ones that are bucking this sell-off are the Araneta stocks, although they are paring back a touch. But this is the 3-day chart just to see how they were surging and then going back to normal. So, you can see Araneta Properties up by 35% in the past 3 days. In 7 days, that's already 100% gain. Bright Kindle, which is a property and mining company led by Romualdez, that was up by 13%. In the past 3 days, but AP Securities does say these gains are not sustainable. These are not fundamentally driven, based purely on emotion. So just to show that, PhilWeb, for example, dropped by as much as 12% yesterday. It gained 80% in 5 days. Prime Media also dropped as much as 10% after gaining 65% in 3 days. So at the end of the line, Jess, buy these stocks at your own risk.
Okay, now Dan, speaking of fundamentals, we are not done with earnings season, and you've got one gauge of reopening. Tell us more about that.
All right, we'll take a look at Jollibee, which is also bucking the sell-off at the local bourse. That's up by 0.4%. This as they reported that the first quarter net income is 2.31 billion pesos versus 153 million pesos. That's way more times that we can multiply. This as the same store sales growth jumped by 16.5%. It was only one market, and that is China, which declined by 9.1% due to the COVID restrictions there.
Business leaders say the incoming Marcos administration needs to expand the role of the private sector in identifying outstanding economic issues. PCCI President George Barcelon said the government and the industry must reach broad agreement on which initiative to pursue to better coordinate their efforts. Barcelon adds that the economic team to be formed by Marcos will need to be credible. Meanwhile, the Management Association of the Philippines says the private sector can provide its expertise in selected industries to accelerate recovery from the pandemic.
Now, an international think tank says investments into the Philippines may take some time to come in, even with Bongbong Marcos's presumptive landslide win. Now, this, as analysts point out, that the presumptive president-elect has yet to provide a clear economic policy direction for the country. Pantheon Macroeconomics maintained that uncertainty still hangs over Marcos's win. Pantheon's emerging Asia chief economist Miguel Chanco said the Marcoses campaign was, quote, devoid of specific proposals for the economy, with BBM refusing to talk beyond vague aspirations to create more jobs.
All right, Dan, uncertainty, wait-and-see mode, those at least seem to be the themes so far since post-election day.
Exactly. We need a bit more information there to keep the market steady as well, Jess.
Okay, something, of course, that we are going to keep tabs on, and that's a first look into the business day this Thursday, May 12, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.